It is my privilege to say a few words about Bathylle Missika. I hope I pronounce the name correctly, ma'am. Ms. Missika is Head of Division Networks, Partnership and Gender OECD Development Center. She oversees the Development Center's work on the development narrative and contribution of its various stakeholders, ranging from the contribution of non-state actors, such as foundations, to development stakeholders, that is, heads of communication from developmental agencies and ministries. She joined OECD in 2012 after working in UNDP's Conflict Bureau, focusing on a portfolio of post-conflict and fragile countries in Africa. Prior to returning to the UN, Ms. Missika had focused her work on issues of governance, state fragility, and basic service delivery, both at OECD and in UNDP. She specifically led the OECD network on governance from 2004 to 2008 and held the position of Deputy Coordinator for UNDP's Governance Trust Fund 2003 and 4 before joining UNDP in 2000. Ms. Missika holds a degree in MA and Public Service from Sciences Po in Paris, an International Affairs degree from Tufts University, and an MA in International Relations and Economics from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies at Washington, D.C. She lectured at Paris School of International Affairs from 2008 to 2011. Welcome again, ma'am, and we look forward to, we've just come from a small session with corporates where we had the pleasure of an interaction with Ms. Missika. May I invite Ms. Missika to say a few words to this august audience on the subject that is close to her function and her heart. Ms. Missika.
So it's my great honor to be here. And again, Partha is very close to our heart at the OECD. He's a member through Mahindra of the Emerging Markets Network. And we share a passion for also thinking about how sustainability can change the world. And it's also an honor to see some old friends in the room. Siddhartha Roy has been a very long friend of our group as well. So again, thank you for having me. It's an honor. I'll tell you a bit why I'm here and why we're revealing this report today, unleashing it. It's the very first time that we present it. It's officially launched in Delhi tomorrow. And as we were asking a lot of the philanthropists and the companies working on CSR that we work with, what would it take for you to be able to do your job better, to do this philanthropy or this CSR better? You know what they all said? Well, first of all, less regulation, more tax incentives. Well, sorry, this we cannot deliver, but that's one thing they said. Second thing is more information on what others are doing. More data, in other words, because we operate in the dark. And then finally, they said more collaboration. So if you have more information, then you can also better collaborate. So we try to make their wish come true, at least on number 2. Number 3 is more or less up to you, and then regulation is the powers that be. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about what our report has to show. So first, why do we need another report? Don't we have enough to read now? Don't we have enough data? In the era of the internet, we feel we're bombarded with different information. But it's interesting to see that we have very little information about what exactly are philanthropists spending their money on. We even have less information about what works, what is actually bringing results, what is producing an outcome. But before you get into that level of sophistication or that level of ambition, you have to see who is doing what and where. And can you actually tell us that? You will find a lot of figures on the internet, but can you actually know that? So this is really why we got into this research, because we can't go to scale if we don't collaborate more. But this is an area where where organizations have tended to work separately from each other, where you don't get bonuses, you don't get more tax incentives for collaboration. So it has to be voluntary. And you have the world divided in basically 2 big categories. the foundations, so family foundation, trusts, corporate foundations, and they tend to talk to each other to a degree. And then you have the corporates. And look, in the room, I mean, we're surrounded by corporates. So we like to speak to our own species, okay? So collaboration is not the norm in that space. So when data is scarce, you don't get the best results. And so we thought it would be interesting to get more clarity on that. So where are we now? We are in the left case scenario, whereby we are next to each other, doing very interesting things. From a helicopter view, it looks very dense, but if you look closely, there's very little intersection. Where should we go? Well, ideally, and from the examples we've just been presented, value is being created and impact goes to scale when you have more initiatives that are collaborating, where you leverage each other's resources and strengths, and usually that requires bigger scale partnerships. So how is this data going to help us in that respect? First, I want to tell you about the data itself. We pride ourselves at the OECD, and I think we're known for that, for having very solid data. We have computed this data on the basis of official development assistance. So how much governments give, for example, to India, so how much the US government, how much the Italian government, the French government, the World Bank, this is ODA, official development assistance. How much do they give to India? This is basically how much, if you wanted to caricature it, this is free money that comes in for development, okay? So this is computed by the OECD. We're the custodian of these flows. So there is a methodology and there are categories. We've used exactly the same categories to collect and then categorize philanthropy and CSR. So that way you can look at how much is spent on rural development from ODA versus philanthropy, international philanthropy, domestic philanthropy. So it's very easy to compare apples with apples. You don't have figures that on the one hand will account volunteering, which might be overinflated, and on the other hand that don't, because then the amounts are not comparable. For example, the OECD doesn't count religious flows as development. This is not a philosophical discussion, and this is certainly not why I'm here. I just want to tell you, the definition was there, it's been very well established, so it's very convenient to use it. The data we have on foundations here, some of it's decided not to disclose everything, and I would like to invite you, if you're not already part of this data, to contact us, and you can decide also if there are parts you do not want to share, or we have made that optional. And then we believe data is a global public good, and it will be, so this data will be available on our website as of tomorrow. And good data, does anybody know what good data is? Good data is data that is being used. It's data that is being shared to do something, because looking at data, I mean, I don't know, maybe some of you just love looking at data for the sake of looking at data. Maybe I'm not, I don't love data enough to do that. I think data, I mean, we're action-oriented. With Sparta, we said, okay, so what's next? What are we going to do with this data? How fast can we run? So please use it, share it. It's free, it's accessible, and you're going to give us more, and we're going to transform and do great things together. So this is where it is. So in case, contact us if, I know it's a little cryptic. This is, I'm not the one who designs the website. So this is where it's going to be on our very own page of the OECD Center on Philanthropy. And now, what are we saying in that report? So we're saying that the money has been coming and that philanthropy has been therefore growing because of several factors. One is India has been growing quite well, and there's been especially income growth at the top of the distribution, meaning more well-off people, companies making profits, therefore generating revenue, high net worth, starting foundations. So this creates value. You have dollar amounts or rupee amounts. The second one, which is of course very well known to all of you, is the CSR Act, the Indian Companies Act, which has mandated companies to spend the 2% on CSR. So that has created, has made a lot of resources available. Now, how much are we talking about globally? So if you look at ODA, so Official Development Assistance, going to India, which is still a big recipient of these flows, domestic philanthropy and CSR are still quite modest. But you shouldn't look at these figures from that perspective, because they're modest, but they're growing and they have immense potential. Because foundations and CSR, they're not bound by political cycles. They don't have taxpayers who are getting angrier and angrier at governments. This green circle here is going to shrink. And especially for countries like India, as they graduate from one income level to the next, while the blue one is going to be unleashed more and more. The other blue one, the smaller one, is cross-border philanthropy. So this is how much Mr. Gates, the foundation, gives to India, Packard and MacArthur, Ford Foundation. And our finding, because the scale is correct on this slide, is that already we have measured there are more domestic flows of philanthropy than there are international flows. So I find that really exciting. The potential is here. It's not going to come from, I mean, we love Mr. Gates giving money to India, but the potential is in this room and in Indian philanthropy. And I think this should be a pride and a source of hope and ideas for what do we do with that money to make the best of it, to unleash it for the best outcomes. So where are you spending the money? So the top three are education, health, and what it says multi-sector, it's because the classifications are different between CSR and philanthropy, but it's mainly rural development. So those are the three. So you can see a clear preference for basic services and rural, again, which I think is quite specific to India when we compare it to what it is internationally. This is something that we have found which is quite country-specific. Now, this is about more of a breakup of the flows. I'll go quickly here because in the interest of time. We have found that gender equality is lagging behind. We do apply a marker for those of you who want to know how this is constructed. So either you're doing something fully on gender and then therefore there's a double marker, or you're doing a rural program which targets women and then therefore we also mark it. And so we try and capture it that way. And even when we capture it that way, we see it's completely underrepresented. Why? Because gender is one of these issues which is not a sector and it's cross-cutting, therefore sometimes it also gets forgotten. And ignoring it has very high costs. One of the projects I oversee in the division I run at the OECD is to look at the cost of discrimination from social norms and laws. And the cost is 6.5% of GDP. So I stand here in front of you not telling you that this is an abuse of basic rights. No, it makes economic sense when you have an education program to think about how gender norms might be an obstacle, a retarder of change. So you look how much we're talking about in terms of flows, and this is quite small. And I think in terms of partnerships and what next, this is an area where we could be doing things, or you could be doing things more together. So now, where is the money going when it comes to philanthropy and CSR? Top three states, you can see. So our figures show that the states with the biggest population get the most money from philanthropy and CSR. Again, we bear no judgment on this. I'm not saying it's a good thing or it's a bad thing. This is just something you should know. If I were in your shoes, I would think, okay, so if I have activities there, it means a lot of other people are there. So how am I going to know what they do? Can we get together? As Partha likes to say, let's not invent new things. Let's try and see. You do women's empowerment and education, so do I. You want to create job for rural women? I also have a program. What could we do more together to leverage it and to create scale? And we have also seen from this research that the allocations by state are not concentrated where there is the highest poverty incidence. So again, not bearing judgment, we're not saying you should be spending the money where the most the needs are. We're very well aware regulation is what it is. It's also been channeled in certain ways for certain reasons, but you should be aware of that. at least having the data allows you to make these calls. If you decide as your company that your CSR will target the most forgotten areas and reach the last mile, then you must know also that you're going to be more in the let's do a pilot or let's address these left behind, while you might want to go for scale and partnerships if you're more in more populated area on issues that everybody's working on, including the government. So we've also looked at the states that receive the higher social public spending tend to have a higher proportion of philanthropy and CSR. What does it mean? You can leverage it. These partnerships, you will want an exit strategy at some point, so maybe partnering with the government is a good thing. You need scale. You're going to need traction. So this is another way to look at it. So, however, and this was something a few discussions about this morning, philanthropy and CSR per capita are lower in states where capita public expenditure is higher. Well, I'll let you digest the figures because I'm more interested in the what next. What do we do with it? So you've seen there's some areas where we have large funding, like healthcare, where others are lagging behind. So what to do about it? Again, you can say, okay, I'm going to focus on the ones where everybody is. You can also, and this is probably our view because we're biased, think that unlocking the potential of some of the areas you're already working in will require also more investment along the lines of gender equality and gender empowerment. Now, we need to have more of the information because otherwise we will not be able to unlock some of these partnerships. So one thing we think you can do, because you're also so well organized and you have BCCI, which is well established, has an amazing brand name and a network, is to help also bring some of the philanthropists in your conversation. Maybe use it as a pilot for the rest of the country, because these conversations need to merge at some point, and they're still on separate tracks. And the conversation you should be having is not eventually how much, is how does that funding translate into outcomes? Because it doesn't matter how many, at the end, how many rupees or dollars you spend, because sometimes you spend it and it equates to nothing. What matters is, are these girls learning anything? And when they graduate, can they actually be your employees tomorrow? Are they the best and the brightest? Because, as you all know, sustainability comes mainly from an enlightened cockpit. So you need to have a leader who understands the company needs to transform. That's one. Two, consumers, like all of us, we vote with our checkbook. So when I shop for my kids, I'll choose a brand, I'll choose a supermarket that is more in line with my values if I have the choice between two and their equivalent price. And the third one, most important, is the employees. If you want to attract tomorrow's Wharton graduates, IIT graduates in your companies, you're going to need to transform from the inside. And so how do you get, first of all, these people to have these skills and to get to that point? That's something you have to think about as you support education, for instance, and skills and training. And second, you have to make your company attractive, because we're not going to fool millennials. You know, they come to us at the OECD and they say, what are the values in your team? Honestly, I want to say, well, sushi on Friday? I didn't even understand when they first, Barta and I were discussing how we're being coached by our millennials. They drive us crazy, but they are also telling us something. They're telling us, you are not making sense. This is not the place where I like to work. So unless you see and transform the company and then do CSR that is meaningful, that is not just for show, not just for a report, things will not change. So I think this is really, again, what we should be aspiring to. So this is where we are. I'll end with that. This is the status quo. It's very nice. I could actually play with it a little bit to show you there are some collaborations happening. Second, this is where we are going to be most likely in a few years. So CSR is going to get more and more organized. It's going to get more and more regulated. But still, there'll be inspired people who will think that outcomes and measuring impact is what matters the most, in spite of regulation that sometimes is a little complicated. And the optimal scenario is the third one. Is not to think, oh, I belong to the CSR tribe or I belong to the philanthropy tribe. No, I'm working towards educational outcomes or lifting girls out of poverty and giving them the tools to succeed, in the 21st century. And this is going to take a lot of different actors. This is what Agenda 2030 is telling us. So with that and the what next, we're in good hands. We're here to help. Thank you very much. And it's been, again, a privilege to be here with you today. So thank you very much.